So as everybody's coming back from coffee, very important to caffeinate for the late afternoon going into a good weekend. I'm extremely excited to bring up somebody who needs no introduction for this community. Our friend, our colleague, and one of our partners from Bellingcat, the founder of Bellingcat, our friend Eliot Higgins. Please help me welcome him to the stage.
Everyone, I am the last barrier between you and the free drinks they give out at events like this, so I'll try and be quick. I'm Eliot Higgins. I'm the founder of Bellingcat. We're an open source investigation website. And I'm going to take you through today how, through my own journey, we've seen open source investigation develop to a point now where the use of open source investigation for justice and accountability is something that's on everyone's mind and how we're addressing it at Bellingcat. So I started doing open source investigation basically to win arguments on the internet. For no other better reason than that. I was just working in a normal office job doing administration, and I was very bored, and I was online on the Guardian Middle East live blog arguing about what was happening in Libya with the people in the comments. And I am very argumentative. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll know that. And I was asked a question by someone when I posted this video online. This video is from TG in Libya. Also, it was claimed by the rebels, and some smart aleck on the comments on the Guardian live blog said, well, how do you know where this was filmed? And I actually thought, I don't know where this was filmed. So this was back in 2011, before we had all these clever little techniques. So I thought, how can I figure this out? And I realized that there were two buildings in this. There was a mosque with a dome and a minaret, and it was next to a road with 2 lanes of traffic, and wide enough to fit a tank. So I thought, well, maybe I can go to TG in Libya on Google Earth. I saw it. I saw there was a road running through the center of it, and I zoomed in. I thought, well, there's 2 lanes of traffic there. You can see the cars. They're quite wide, but not as wide as a tank. So I followed that road along until I found this mosque with a dome and a minaret. And I thought at that point, well, let's watch the video again and see what other details there are that I can see. And I started seeing things like you could see the utility poles, the curve of the road, and lots of other details. So we started with a large detail, the claim that it was in TG, narrowed it down by looking for the road, then the mosque, and then the smaller and smaller details. And this was my first ever geolocation. And after that, in October 2011, my daughter was born, my first child, and basically my entire life went out the window, and I didn't have much to do for 4 months apart from look after my daughter. But in 2012, I started a blog called the Brown Moses blog, and started looking at videos like this coming from the conflicts in Syria. And over time, I realized something. I realized you could collect collections of these videos and start figuring out where they were filmed. So here's one example. This is a fairly historic video. This is the first ever video of a barrel bomb that was taken in Syria. Now, you look at that, and you think, well, that doesn't look like any kind of bomb. That looks like someone's pushed over a bin. So you had articles like this in Russia Today called Barrel Bomb Baloney, saying that it was nonsense that they would use such a thing. And I had realized that we could search through social media content and discover objects like and things like videos, content, identifying YouTube channels used by rebel groups. And one of those channels published this video. And this is the first ever video of a barrel bomb being pushed out of the back of a helicopter, which you can see just there. Now, that isn't super clear, so we still had denials, but then we had this come out. This is actually filmed inside a helicopter as a barrel bomb is lit by a cigarette and pushed out the back. Now, what we're seeing here is a video that was published online in 2012. And again, we had these arguments about, is this real? Can we trust it? But it was possible to actually find this location using satellite imagery. And we can actually zoom into the exact location. I'm glad to say I wasn't the one looking for this. It was done by someone else. But we can compare the layout of the roads, the buildings, and other details to confirm the location. So over time, these techniques became more and more widely recognized and of interest to different people. And in 2015, Russia started bombing Syria. And I'm going to show you a video now about a bombing that happened in Syria that we investigated.
أنا متولي جلال تاريخ 20/10/2015 قام طيران الحرب الروسي بشن غارة على مدينة سرمين فتبين أنه الغارة استهدفت مدرسة هي ملاصقة للمشفى الميداني ولله الحمد أن المدرسة كانت خارجة عن العمل بسبب القصف السابق للمدرسة وكان اتفاق المدني كانت قبل ما تشن الغارة بثواني دقائق عم تطلب من الناس انه تروح من الموقع وانا بالموقع عم بصور الغارة فهون شن الطيران فالضرب في الموقع اللي انا فيه على بعد مترين او 3 امتار وقع الصاروخ مني. اول ما وقع الصاروخ انا حسيت ان جسمي بده يتمزق من الضغط. بالقابل كل الناس عم تسمع صوت عياط والناس ما منتبه علي انه في هون واحد مصاب. كان في شظير الصدر وحروق بايدي اليسار وشظايا بايدي اليمين واجري اليسار بالاضافه الى ردود في كل الجسم والصدر وشق كبير بالفك السفلي إضافة إلى شق بالعين. الله أكبر! أنت مضطر أنك تتوجه للموقع سواء أنت كعملك كموظف أو أنت عملك كرجل منقذ أو مسعف لأنه في ناس بحاجتك.
So often when you're investigating events, you only really have one version of that event coming from one side. But in this case, we had a second version of events coming from Russia. And they presented this satellite image, claiming that it showed the location supposedly attacked, showing no damage whatsoever. And Russia Today covered this and explained what the Russian Ministry of Defense was claiming.
It was recently alleged that Russian jets destroyed a hospital in the city of Samin, causing the Russian Defense Ministry to, well, call on journalists to double-check the stories they publish.
I call on the respected mass media not to jeopardize their reputation by publishing fakes like this.
But it's not just the media. The accusations are actually picked up by the US State Department. And to prove the hospital is totally intact, the Russian Defense Ministry provided up-to-date satellite photographs.
The building on this image, dated October 31st, does not look like it was recently bombed. How can we tell if it's the hospital in Sarmin? A year ago, a video was posted on YouTube that shows the hospital under construction. Here's a screenshot from that year-old video. And here is the Russian Defense Ministry's aerial image of what it says is the hospital. We see a similar dome-shaped structure next to the building on both images. We see a wall or a fence positioned in a similar way. So where exactly is the hospital that Russia is accused of hitting?
So that was a good question. First of all, we needed to check it was the correct location that was allegedly bombed and in this satellite imagery. And we can do that quite simply by going to the location in question and overlaying the Russian image. Then we have to check the white helmets footage is in the same location. So here we have the white helmets footage. The hospital is just off to the left-hand side of the camera image. What we're able to see here is the location pointing to the north. We can see this green mark on the ground, and that's where the cameraman was stood when the bomb went off. But what's most important is the details in the background. So we have this structure here we can see on the satellite imagery, casting a very regular shadow. It's this structure here. We can see next to it some poles that are standing, and we can see 4 shadows cast by those poles, and those poles are also visible here in the background. And next to that, there's a wall casting a very regular shadow, and we can see that same wall here. Now let's just watch the footage again. We can get a sense that we can see the poles here, the wall here, and the bomb lands around in the center of the screen close to the motorcyclist.
وأنا بالواقع بصور الغارة.
So following that, other camera crews went to the scene and filmed the location, so we can actually see what it looks like after that airstrike. So the right-hand side image is from before the airstrike, the left-hand side video is from after. So we can see that regular building has now been completely destroyed. So you no longer see that shadow, that regular shape on a satellite image. The 4 poles next to it, 2 of them have been knocked down by the explosion. And to the left, we can see the wall has been completely demolished by the explosion. So why is this relevant to our investigation? Well, we looked at the Russian image and we noticed something a bit odd. The building that's supposedly destroyed is still standing. We can see the 4 shadows from the poles, and they're still there, and the wall behind it is also still there. That's because this image, supposedly from after the airstrike, the evidence that this airstrike hadn't took place as claimed, is actually from before the airstrike took place. They just misrepresented the date of the imagery. So there was more and more interest in the use of open source investigation in different fields. Very early, there were a lot of journalists and NGOs interested. Of course, we had the Atlantic Council publish a few reports that we were involved in. But we then moved on to another field of interest, international courts, and the question of how open source information can be used as part of international investigations. And in August 2017, this arrest warrant was issued for a commander in the Al-Saqqa Brigades named Wafali. And this was based partly on 6 Facebook videos that had been shared by him that showed him executing prisoners. So because this was publicly available information, we decided to start looking into what we could do with these videos. And this is what we did with one of them. So in this video, we're looking at the 6th video in the sequence that you posted. Here, rather than just 1 or 2 people being executed, it's rows and rows of prisoners. The first thing we did is we extracted frames, stills from this video, and this allowed us to create an image that allowed us to see the whole area at once and get a sense of what we were actually seeing, not just from a single moment in the video. So we could start seeing details that were in the background more clearly. For example, it's very hard to see, but there's some buildings in the distance. There's a wall that's also visible and a fork in the dirt road, which isn't much to go on, but it helps us narrow down where these people could be. Because we knew they were in Benghazi, and from their Facebook page, they had photographs of them fighting in an area called the Chinese building area, which had these partly constructed buildings that looked very similar. So we made the best guess that these executions would be near this location, but where? So we found the Chinese building area in Benghazi on satellite imagery, and this is this large area of partly constructed apartment buildings. So we searched through until we could find an open space with the buildings visible in the distance, a wall, and a dirt path with a fork in the road. And eventually we came to this location. After we tried many, many other locations, we came to this one, and we noticed the features were there that we were interested in. But what really nailed it for us was when we took the camera position inside the video and the camera position in Google Earth, and we matched them. Now, this is the Google Earth satellite imagery. Just look at the bushes in the background and how when we merge the images together, the bushes are in the same location. So we could be certain this is the same location, but we became more certain when we saw this appear on the satellite imagery from after the execution. Track marks and these dark spots. Now these dark spots line up perfectly with the bloodstains from the executions. So we know precisely where these executions took place. Because we know where they took place, we can also figure out the precise location of the camera. Because we know the precise location of the camera, we can then use the shadows for something. These shadows can be used as a sundial to figure out the exact time of day the executions took place. We can use a plugin for Blender that tells us the time of day, and what we can do then is look at the satellite imagery and how that changes to see when the first changes in the satellite imagery occurred, indicating the executions that took place. So from that, we were able to gather lots and lots of information. And the International Criminal Court's been very engaged with us. They've been talking to us a lot. They have a technology advisory board talking to them about the use of open source investigation. And recently, we've been working with a coalition of groups on the conflict in Yemen, including the Global Legal Action Network, the Syrian Archive, and others. And we invited them, along with the New York Times, the Human Rights Center, and Amnesty International, to a hackathon a few months ago to look into 100 airstrikes that happened in Yemen, trying to figure out as much as we could about them. And we're now working on a project where we're actually investigating 100 airstrikes as part of legal cases to prevent arms exports to Saudi Arabia. And the Global Legal Action Network put together a quick video explaining what we're doing. So as you can see, there's quite a large coalition of organizations involved with that. We're mainly focusing at the moment on our Yemen projects. What we've done there is we've worked with the Global Legal Action Network and other organizations to create a new process for investigation and archiving as we do investigations. One big issue we've faced, we've been approached to submit evidence for the MH17 inquiry, for example. Because of the way we've been doing our investigations in the past, we haven't systematically archived information. The way we do investigations doesn't always fit what courts need. So the way we're doing this project is we're focusing on that in particular. And using this new methodology, it's not just for presenting the evidence in court, but it sets a minimum standard for our work so that we know we're hitting these key points and these key issues. One thing we're using as part of our investigation process is Hunchly. Hunchly is a plugin that allows you to archive your pages as you go and track your investigations, which is very important for showing a court how we actually came to a conclusion. We've also been partnering with the Syrian Archive, who are now creating a version of their website for the Yemen Archive. So the idea here is that when we verify videos, when we create all this metadata around it, we'll actually be able to share it on an online database with more details. They'll match back to our previous investigations. So anyone searching for information about incidents can do a simple geofence search. What we're also going to do is launch the Yemen Archive site with them as well. So this will be a separate website they're running. One thing we want to do here is once we've gone through all the pain of developing this process, figuring out where it goes wrong, piecing it together, we want to share it with other organizations. We don't want to charge people for it. We just want to package it up and say, we've done all the difficult stuff of figuring out how this stuff works. We want to share it with you. So a big part of what we'll also be doing, hopefully later this year, is working with other organizations to use the same investigation process. So that's what we've been up to over the last few months. And I think now we're having a Q&A. So thank you very much. Okay, so hands up if you've got a question. I think we've got one or two mics out there.
Thanks. Have you seen any changes in people's behavior? I'm thinking of soldiers in the Ukraine, for example, being told to stop using iPhones because the Russians are targeting them. Are you seeing the people you're looking at trying not to provide sort of incriminating evidence, or are people just naturally verbose?
We have seen some changes in behavior. Of course, the Duma has passed a law recently in Russia preventing soldiers, or making it illegal, which is bolting the stable door after the horse is bolted. But what we're finding is moving into new areas, often you're dealing with people who have no idea about open source investigation. A good example is with the BBC Africa Eye film, Anatomy of a Killing. We were looking into this video, and then the BBC got involved, and as did Amnesty and others. But when the government of Cameroon was approached about this video, which shows soldiers taking two women and two young children off the road and executing them, they called it fake news. They literally called it fake news, which was, like a red rag to a bull for us open source investigators. So we investigated this. We helped the BBC. They led the investigation. Amnesty was there, and it's like they didn't know that we could do this stuff with open source material. We were able to find the exact location it took place, who was in the videos, and they eventually had to admit it wasn't fake news. It really happened, and they arrested the people involved. Okay, let's see. Fine line between open source research and becoming an intelligence agency. I guess it's about the end product. With intelligence, you're producing an intelligence product. At the end, it has a specific purpose. With the kind of work we're doing at Bellingcat, we have often multiple outputs to what we're doing. We talk about identify, verify, and amplify as the process we use, but that amplification of verified content can take many different shapes. Looking at the Yemen project, for example, we hope some of this will be used in courts, and we're aiming to do it like that, but it can also be used for media projects, articles on the websites. We can have different kinds of campaigns around it, because once we've verified that information and investigated it, we have lots of possible outcomes. Any other questions from the floor?
Hi, I'm BBC journalist. My name is Olga. I'm covering Eastern Europe. Thank you very much for your breathtaking work. I'm absolutely a fan and admire what you did. And with the MH17 investigation and with Africa Eye, absolutely brilliant. My question is, how do you manage to get resources, and how much time does it take for you to make that investigation? Because I understand how much actually you have to people, how many people and how much resources you have to invest to complete it from the beginning to the end. And how do you manage to survive as a business media model, making investigations? Because for big media companies, it is always a challenge to put their resources into investigation when they don't know how much time will it take, what impact will be finally, and they still have to use people. Thank you very much.
So with the MH17 investigation we published recently, that was started in August last year. So that was mainly one person leading the investigation with the support of 3 or 4 other people at Bellingcat looking for additional information. We had actually finished it at the start of the year, but then Searchface and FindFace came online and we discovered there was a lot more information we could find using those. As for the resources, currently at Bellingcat we get about 50% of our funding from various foundations. 50% we get from running workshops, and I think because of Bellingcat's kind of unique position in the open source community and how well we're known, we have the advantage of being able to have that as a good source of income for us because we have something unique to offer and a high demand for that. We're also currently looking at having a membership area for Bellingcat where we'll still publish all the articles that we have, but it'll be an area where people can come to kind of talk to the kind of experts we talk to, kind of like a safe space for people off Twitter where every time you say something you don't have 20 people coming up with a conspiracy theory telling you you're wrong even if you've got 40 years of experience in the field you're talking about. So we're hoping that will take off, and it's similar to the decorrespondent model they've been using, but I still want to make the information as open as possible, but also for people who want to support Bellingcat, giving them a way to do that. Let's see, from the screen, how is the field of satellite imagery advancing and how does it impact our work? Well, we found recently using stuff like Planet Labs has been very useful. We've got access to the daily imagery there. This kind of growth of the amount of imagery that's available, we've got more digital globe satellites going up as well, is very useful and very important for what we're doing. I think the biggest problem we've had is the changes that were made to Terra Server, which made it a lot more difficult to actually use their imagery, and I think their interface is virtually unusable now, unfortunately. Do I verify claims made by resting countries? We do. We did a really good investigation on the Al-Jinnah mosque bombing in Syria, where the US bombed a mosque and then said it wasn't a mosque, and we spent a few weeks with Human Rights Watch and Forensic Architecture reconstructing the building before it was destroyed, proving it was a mosque and that it was in use. And any questions from the floor? Where's the mic people? Oh, Steve, first then.
You mentioned potentially doing a safe space where people can discuss and not have the ridiculous backlash from the internet from conspiracy theorists. My question was, what precautions does Bellingcat take, other than that, to kind of protect not only sort of the safety of their workers, not just maybe like physical safety and the threats they face, but like the psychological safety, because you're at the forefront of open source and you're dealing with horrific content all the time and people do burn out. So what's Bellingcat's, not necessarily solution, but the best way of coping with that for their workers?
Yeah, so vicarious trauma is something that I'm very concerned about because, I've been doing this for 7 years and I know the kind of imagery that people see. I think having an environment where people know they can talk about that kind of thing is, first of all, very important. One thing I'm doing, we've just opened an office in The Hague. One thing we're going to be doing is, hiring someone who's specializing in this kind of issue to talk to our staff and make sure the staff are aware that if they ever have a kind of problem relating to vicarious trauma or any kind of problem really, that there's a place that they can go to and talk to, and they can talk freely. And it's not, as some other organizations have treated it, as sign of weakness or an inability to do jobs, but it's just part of what we encounter, and it can be very difficult to handle that, and there's no shame in that. And we have to address it, and we have to address it in a healthy way. So I think I'm out of time now, so sorry, no more questions. Thank you very much for your time. I'm Eliot Higgins, and I'm Bellingcat. Thank you.